Very good afternoon and welcome to this EPC briefing, delivering on the European Green Deal, what's in the winter package for energy, where we'll be taking a closer look at the wide range of new energy proposals that the European Commission published yesterday. I'm Annika Hedberg. I'm Head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at EPC and will be moderating today's discussion. We are absolutely delighted to have Mr. Stefano Grassi, Head of Cabinet for European Commissioner for Energy, with us today. And we'll be talking about what these new proposals could mean for energy efficiency, buildings, the gas market, methane emissions, the overall implications for business and consumers. And I would suggest that do make yourself comfortable, as we surely have a lot to cover today. We'll start with an introduction from Mr. Grassi, which will be followed by 3 short reactions from EPC members from Equinor, Siemens and Housing Europe. And I'll then turn to the audience for further questions and comments. So if you are interested to ask a question, just click on the hand icon if you wish to speak, or alternatively, please use the space provided to ask short written questions. With these words, I would like to hand over to Mr. Grassi, the Head of Cabinet for European Commissioner for Energy from European Commission. The floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing the presentation on the proposals that were published yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika, and it is a great pleasure for me to be with you and all the EPC friends today, the day after the presentation of our winter Green Deal package, and to have a chance to discuss with you what we put on the table and to hear your reactions and your questions. It's even a greater pleasure to be with the panelists we have today, and to be reunited with an old friend of mine like Olaf. We were studying together many years ago and having at the time already long discussions on everything in life, not in energy. Now we are also enriched our dialogue on energy, and it's particularly interesting for me to see how critical he will be or how positive he will be for our package. I will simply try to set the scene, because I think what is the most attractive part of this policy briefing today is the interactive part and the reactions, and I will simply try to walk you through the main parts of our package, exactly to give you an opportunity, then a hook to give your questions and your reactions. I will do it with the help of some slides, and thanks to the colleagues who have already put it on the screen. I hope you can see them. We will go through them quite quickly, but I hope they will give you an immediate idea of the different topics that I will quickly review in describing the package. Yesterday's package was for us a way to complete a task, to complete a work that we had started. We had started in July to reflect the Green Deal into the energy policy legislation, and in a way to bring the Green Deal to 3 areas which are possibly the most challenging to tackle in terms of decarbonization. And also areas where the gains can be the largest if we succeed. First of all, the gas sector. Second, the non-carbon emissions, the methane, and the third, the buildings. And we have tried to do that in a way that also is aware and reflective of the broader context we are living now and the lessons we are learning about the reality of the clean energy transition. So, in a context of high prices, high volatility. So there are different layers in what we put on the table that you can find, different drivers. Wait a second before going to natural gas market. And I will try to unpick some of these layers for you. And let me start indeed from the hydrogen and decarbonized gas markets package, and we can go to the next slide. So here, what you see is the centrality of the gas sector in our energy system. I think is well known to all of you. It's central for our heating, it's central for electricity production, is central for industrial uses. Some of these essential roles will be progressively eroded over the next years for a number of reasons, including the imperative to decarbonize. But the gas sector will remain central for our energy transition, especially if we want to have a cost-effective one, and if we want to reach some hard-to-abate end users, whether it is the steel or the fertilizer sector. So the gas sector, we see it as having now an horizon of change, but also a direction of travel which will open up a lot of opportunities, provided it evolves towards what we call the green gases, the decarbonized gases, whether it is hydrogen, biogas, biomethane, or synthetic fuels. And we can go to the next slide. So we see as a direction of travel moving from the first column on the left. You see is fossil fuels are more 98% of the gaseous fuels present in our energy mix, to move to the last one, the mix 55 on the right on the table, where you see that 3/4 of the gases will be renewable gases. And we can go to the next slide. This, in our view, will unlock incredible opportunities for the sector, whether it is on the hydrogen demand, or we can go to the next slides. Sorry, we don't have it yet. Or the biomethane or biogas, where we see the demand moving from the 200 terawatts that we have, 2,000 terawatt that we have at this stage to 1,000 terawatt in by 2050. So we see doubling over the next 10 years and possibly multiplying by 5 and even more over the next decade. So an incredible horizon of opportunity. But if we want this to happen, we need to set already now the framework conditions for renewable gases to gain competitiveness and replace and for an hydrogen market to get off the ground. I think we can go to the next slides. And these are, I think, the main objectives that you see for our proposal, and some of the layers that I was mentioning. So enabling the development of a hydrogen infrastructure and market, facilitating the integration into the existing gas network of renewable and low carbon gases, phasing out the fossil gas, and ensuring a better functioning and a well-planned gas market today with greater resilience to volatility and price shocks, and a greater energy security. And we can move forward to the next slide. So the task of regulating the hydrogen market in particular is one of the most challenging in what we have done, because here we are very close to a greenfield situation. Hydrogen represents today less than 2% of the EU energy mix. It's produced mainly from fossil fuels and still emitting carbon. There are few companies active in this area, every day more, but still there is no real cross-border infrastructure. We calculate 1,600 kilometers of point to point, no real rules on access to networks, no agreed use standards on the quality of hydrogen that flows in the pipelines. So what we propose here, and we can go to the next slide, is to set out in our gas directive and in the gas regulation the guiding principles to regulate the legal and physical infrastructure for a European hydrogen market. The rules on tariff setting, access to networks, storage and terminals, ownership of a network, financing or repurpose of a new network infrastructure, or hydrogen quality standards. And there are different ways. In one, you can approach the regulation of a nascent market or in a greenfield situation. And what we have chosen to do is to lay out a pro-competitive framework with strong pro-competitive features that will allow space for both the traditional gas players, but also for newcomers, new type of companies to enter the market, because we consider that this is the best way to keep the prices down, to get the market off the ground, and to have an optimal design of infrastructure. At the same time, we have chosen to go for a precise framework. Some people will say, why don't you get a sandbox and let everyone test options and then move forward with regulation at a later stage? but we consider that we needed to give a framework of certainty, but one applied in steps. So more stringent rules kicking in only after 2030, when the market will be mature. And you see here some example of the different rules on negotiated or regulated access to networks, the unbundling rules, the regulation of private hydrogen networks, etc. So this stepwise approach, in our view, is what will give investors certainty about the regulatory environment already today, but also allow all the players space and room to explore different business and industrial solution, at least in a period up to 2030. And what we want with that is to establish a liquid, competitive, and open market in Europe at the European scale, because we consider that this is the best way to deliver the target of up to 10 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, and to be the first and the largest market of hydrogen in the world by this decade. We can move to the next slides. As part of what we are doing here, we are laying out rules for the certification of low carbon hydrogen based on life cycle emissions and a mass balance methodology. We made a promise at the time that we presented the Renewable Energy Directive in July that we would have completed the framework for certification also for low carbon hydrogen, to have a full system of certification covering all the types of renewable and low carbon hydrogen by the end of this year, in order to allow all market players to make informed choices. And this is what we are doing here. And I cannot really go through all the provisions on hydrogen, but I would like also to point you to the importance of a provision on permitting and authorization, where we allow existing permitting for gas pipelines to be also valid for repurposed hydrogen pipeline. And we introduce time limits for the administrative procedures for authorizing new installations and new infrastructure. I think it's 2 years. So I think these, together with the rules on financing, repurposing and planning repurposing, I think is a strong set of rules to allow the development of the grid to move away from the 160,000 kilometers today and develop a real continental backbone over the next decade and beyond. We can move to the next slide. On the carbon neutral biogases, I already indicated how much potential we see there, and you see on the slide also the 7 or 8 member states with the largest potential. We see that there is a real market there. We calculated around 1/4 of the current gas consumption for households, especially for heating, could be replaced over the next decade by biomethane and biogases. And there, what we do is to tackle the challenge not to design a new market, we don't need to do that, but to provide the conditions for better access and lower production costs for an industry that I said has vast scale-up opportunities. We do that, next slides, through a system of tariff discounts for these gases, and by removing bottlenecks to access to the transmission network, in particular from the distribution network, because we want to create a broader wholesale market, broaden the number of, let's say, the basis of consumers that can pay for the network and for the services, and not to keep this market confined to local markets. We also abolish the cross-border tariffs there to create a real single market, keep prices down and facilitate uptake. We can go to the next slide. And this is another example. I cannot really walk you through all the proposal of another layer of what we are doing here. We are designing rules for integrating new gaseous fuels. We're designing a new market for hydrogen. We are also trying to indicate whether the direction of travel is one of progressive decline in the consumption of fossil fuels. And there are important measures that we called anti-stranded assets. Some have already attracted a lot of attention. We have rules on network planning that ask the TSOs also to identify the parts of the network that will be decommissioned. There is a long-term ban on long-term fossil gas contracts after 2049, with an expiry date after 2049. We can go to the next slide. And the other layer of this reform is what we do for a greater resilience of the markets and protection of consumers. We can go to the next slide. We have a section of our gas package which is dedicated to align the rules of the consumer protection with rules that exist in the electricity market, and to allow consumers to be able to actively choose renewable gases and to be in a better position in the event of future volatility. We have a lighter set of rules for hydrogen. You see it in the blue part on the screen. We can move to the next slide. And then we address another part, which is very high on the agenda now, is the part on security of supply and storage. I think one of the elements that since the summer have been under the spotlight has been the situation of storage across Europe, and particularly the level of the unfulfilled level of storage in some member countries where there is no regulated, it is not a regulated activity, or where even storage is owned by third country entities. So we bring storage and the word storage within our security of supply regulation. We are not altering its characteristics. We are integrating the consideration of storage levels in the common risk assessment that member states will have to do at regional level, and we indicate a menu of measures that can be taken, including deciding on minimum common level of storage, or deciding on tendering, auctioning, or other measures to increase the level of storage. We give a clear signal that among the risks to be taken into account, there is also the ownership of storage, in particular when controlled by entities from third countries, and also a clear signal that no member states can block access to storage in another member states. We are also addressing the issue of solidarity in case of emergency, where now it exists only on paper. We are supposed to have 40 solidarity agreements between member states in order to implement the reciprocal help in case of an emergency. Only 2 exist, and they've been signed recently a bit in a rush. So what we do here is to introduce some measure that will create a sort of default or semi-automatic mechanism for calling on the help of neighboring countries when an emergency strikes and the solidarity customers cannot be supplied with gas, and this will not need a previous memorandum of understanding. And I think we can go to the next slide. We have also introduced a sort of enabling framework for a joint purchase of gas stocks that 2 or more member states can introduce with very simple procedures that we have indicated there. So this is, I think, a very complex reform that is, in our view, similar in importance to what we have done under the electricity market reform in 2019, and has the same spirit of integrating renewable into an existing mature market. All of that is reflecting our idea of the importance of gas for the future, for the closer future, but also for today as a transition fuel. An idea that requires, and we can move to the next slides, also a responsibility on the part of the oil, gas, and coal sector, which we address with our proposal on of a regulation on the reduction of methane emissions. I think we abuse of the word EU leadership too often, but if I may use it for once, I think this is the case where it is maybe justified. We can go to the next slide. It is the sector where the European Union has been the first to adopt a strategy last year to reduce methane emissions across all sectors. And you see on the slide not only where emissions are in Europe, but also why it is so important to address this source of global warming, a very potent pollutant. We were the first to establish an international methane emission observatory with UNEP. We were the first to support the OGMP 2.0 system of voluntary corporate commitments to reduce, to monitor and reduce methane emissions. And we have deployed over the last year a strong diplomatic action to include methane emissions on the agenda of the G20 and the G7. And this led to President von der Leyen, together with President of the US, Biden, to propose a global methane pledge initiative to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030 compared to 2020, which at the COP26 received the support of 108 countries. We can move to the next slide. So what we are doing here is, and here you see, is to address, to move, let's say, from diplomatic actions, strategies, targets, to real concrete routes. And we propose that the EU will adopt the first and most advanced framework for reducing methane emissions in the oil, gas, and coal sector, for the simple reasons that technologies exist. The IEA tells us that 80 or 70% of them can be introduced with low or zero cost, and that the gains in the energy sector can be the fastest and the highest. What we do, we can go to the next slide, is to propose rules on monitoring, reporting, and you see from where the methane emissions come from the different sector, oil, gas, buildings, coal, etc. We can go to the next slide. What we do is to intervene across 3 dimensions. First of all, we propose rules on monitoring, reporting, and verification, building on the OGMP 2.0. Second, we introduce, is the yellow part, the mandatory requirements on leak detection and repair in the EU with strict conditions, frequency of interventions, etc. And we prohibit venting and flaring, which are very damaging climate practices, except for some exceptional circumstances. Third point, the green one, and you can go further. We do that for both oil and gas. Next slide. And for coal. And next slide. The third dimension where we intervene, which is a bit the most sensitive point of this reform, is how we tackle methane emissions outside the European Union, because these are clearly several times higher than the emissions that we have within the EU. And here we had to find a solution addressing two different elements. One, we want to leverage our position at global level to foster real change and real reduction across the supply chain. And second, we don't want to be exposed to the criticism, the European Union once again is over-regulating internally, our companies are worse off, and the others can import to the EU market without applying any real standards. So what we do here, we can go to the next slide, is to introduce again measures on 3 or 4 levels. First of all, we introduce a transparency mechanism that will provide visibility on the methane emission intensity and practice of each operator exporting to the EU, the legislation they apply from the country in which we are operating, the emissions they have, etc. And this will create a database, will be made public, and will allow informed choices on our market. Second point, we commit to study by 2025 or even earlier, if possible, whether more stringent requirements such as import thresholds or methane intensity targets can be imposed on third country exporters. Third, we try to make the most of our leadership in global monitoring tool and satellite surveillance, and we create a sort of system of early warning that will allow us to engage with third countries whenever we identify major emission sources or new emission sources, and we will make our knowledge available not only to UNEP to create a sort of methane emission intensity index at global level, but also to other third countries, NGOs, or whoever wants to use this information for calling for methane action. We will continue to deploy our diplomatic action vis-a-vis third countries based on this element. Why we are not moving already today into the direction of introducing methane emission standards? It is because to do that, I think we need, first of all, a robust methodology. We need to have an information basis that is not there yet in terms of calculating emissions across the supply chain. And we need to have both information and methodology, which is recognized by all players, and we need to have a clear analysis of the price and economic impact on the different routes, because this will have significant impact on many of our suppliers. So it is a decision where we will take when the moment will come, based of a real informed and evidence-based way. And also with consultation with energy partners. We can move on. So despite that, we still think that we have a robust and balanced framework, which will help us, we calculate, reduce by 80% emissions in the EU, methane emissions by 2030, and we hope will help us sustain the momentum for strong methane action globally. Just quickly on the buildings part, which is the last but not the least of our proposal. There, the headline ambition, we can move to the next slide, is to turn the European building stock into a zero emission stock by 2050. And to achieve that, we need to upgrade some of the existing tools that are in the 2018 directive, like the definition of nearly zero energy buildings into zero emission buildings. We are looking into the energy performance certificates, harmonized and made mandatory at European level. We introduce tools like building a renovation passport to follow the different steps of a renovation. We have new and more modern rules on smart and for buildings and e-mobility, and on phasing out fossil fuel heating systems by 2040 if the member states put that in their national plans. There is no a ban, but it's an indication that member states should go in that direction. We can move to the next slide. You see here some elements of why we need a renovation action there. If we want to go towards the 35 million of buildings renovated in Europe, as we say in the renovation wave. We can go to the next slide. And we do all of that because we do think that renovation is for us a best policy to achieve multiple goals: decarbonization, address energy poverty, sustain economic activity, modernize our buildings, and integrate in them digital technologies. We can go to the next slide. I've already mentioned that the headline goal is to go towards a zero emission building stock by 2050. So we will introduce the rule that all new buildings after 2030 must be zero emission building powered by renewables, either on site or from energy communities or district heating, if this is technically feasible. We can move to the next slide. You see here the changes that I already I was very effective mentioned in terms of the main changes I introduced. We can go to the next slide. Here, I just want to stop 1 second before concluding, and I'm very close to the conclusion on the minimum energy performance standard, because this is a key piece of what we are doing here. And again, we had to find a difficult calibration between different objectives and different interests. One was, if you want really to arrive at the objective we have by 2030 and 2050 for the decarbonization of a building stock, you will need a system of mandatory energy performance standards with clear timelines, milestones, and steps to bring from everyone to class A by 2050. But this, I think, for reasons of subsidiarity, proportionality, and it's not possible. And this was something that our regulatory scrutiny board also reminded us very strongly. The other alternative would be to do nothing, or to have just an option or a flexible framework there. We decided to take a courageous action and say, despite the reminder from our board, we want to focus mandatory energy performance standards on one specific class of buildings, the G class, which we review in terms of classification. We represent 15% of the buildings that are the most unhealthy, they consume most energy, and normally are used by people with the lowest income and trapped in a situation of high energy bills or impossibility to heat properly their houses. And there we asked member states to bring them according to different timelines that you see here to class F and then to class E by progressively 27, 2030 and 2033, depending if it's residential or public. We leave some elements to the member state to decide how to implement it. So there is no ban on sale or rent. There are different ways you can implement them. And we're curious to see our colleague from the panel, what will be a suggestion there. We have adjusted our approach there to keep ambition, but respect the fact that member states have different starting points. We have done that designing a strategy which is not a top-down obligation, but it's an investment strategy. It's combining regulation and incentives, because there is a clear indication that member states must support compliance with technical assistance, financial incentives, advisory services, support to mortgage financing. And we have today, I think we have possibly the best possible context for that with the recovery fund that you invest. We have worked a lot with Madame Vestager, you will see it soon, to have coherent rules under state aid. For the first time ever, state aid will be possible to be mobilized to support compliance with minimum energy performance standard under this directive. Is a total new thing. And we do believe that in this way, we are not slashing a cost on families, but we will introduce the tools for a real renovation wave that create jobs, increase value for property, and reduce energy bills. I stop here. I don't know if there is another slide, but I want to stop here because I was already long, just to say one last thing. This is an extremely complex package, as you can see also from the overview. In our view, it's very similar in importance to what we have done under the clean energy package for other type of markets. And it's, I think everyone will agree on the broad headline objectives. What is difficult here is the calibration of what we're doing and of the different measures. So no doubt there will be a lot of discussion on that. What we have tried to do is to look at the long-term interest, sometimes to take courageous choice, because the balancing and the realism always come from the institutional process. And we trust, and I stop here, that this may provide us with really the last missing pieces for managing our transition to a greener and more competitive energy system by 2030. I just want to note that in 2 years, this commission has, I think, presented 6 or 7 strategies and revised with these, I think, 7 or 8 pieces of central legislation in the energy sector. So I think it's quite a huge effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for this overview, which is surely a complex package. And it was great to hear also about these diverse measures that are being proposed. And for the audience, I did warn you, there's a lot to cover. We will now move to the initial reactions that we'll hear from 3 different stakeholders. I'll hand over first to Olav Amlid Syversen, who is the Vice President for Political and Public Affairs and Head of EU Affairs at Equinor. So if I can, yes, hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano, for this comprehensive overview, and to Annika and the EPC for organizing today's exchange. Allow me first to recognize the Commission's hard work for leading to yesterday's publication. And Stefano, fear not, we are not that all critical of what we see. Energy transitions are hard. Crafting the right legislation to initiate them and accelerate them is possibly even harder. As for what was published yesterday, we can only present first impressions today, but we look forward to constructive engagement in the times ahead so that we can get this accelerated climate change actions going and the energy transition system also transition. With the methane regulation, the Commission is breaking new ground. The overall approach is sound. We need harmonized reporting and robust standardized methane quantification methodologies to precede reduction targets. In discussion about pricing methane emissions, we need to recognize also that we already have a price guidance in the internal gas market. We also want to underline the importance of the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0 framework. We believe the co-legislators and others should work to ensure a stronger reference to this framework than we see in what is being published. We also believe there needs to be a better reflection of the operational context of different parts of the natural gas value chain in this regulation that currently the proposal sets out. Regarding the decarbonised gas market package, we believe we see a natural evolution of the rules, no revolution. In creating the hydrogen market, technology openness will remain important, and we are encouraged to see a maturing recognition of the importance of low carbon hydrogen, so produced notably from natural gas with CCS. With respect to this package, our focus will be to contribute to clear definition, robust certification methodologies, continued contractual freedom to appropriately mitigate risks throughout the transition, and appropriate mechanism to build markets for decarbonized gases, including tariff design. We need there to be tariffs that also reflect geographical price differences, we believe. Now, last, we welcome the presentation of a strategy addressing how to restore carbon cycles and upscale carbon removal solutions that includes both natural and technological storage, and we look forward to collaborate in the development of high-quality carbon removal certificate schemes. The development of credible, well-functioning carbon removal markets will be important to drive necessary investments in the carbon management solution that science tells us we need. And with these initial remarks, Annika, I look forward to our discussions.
Thank you so much, Olaf. I'll move on directly to Adele and Naudi Champeau, who is the Senior Director for Sustainability and EU Government Affairs at Siemens. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thank you very much, Mr. Grassi, for this comprehensive overview. Maybe first, just to introduce shortly Siemens, you all know, probably it's a European global player, providing technology solution for digital and sustainable transformation of industry, infrastructure, and I would include building in that, and mobility. First, congratulations to the Commission for this comprehensive package, and also in due time. Of course, you understood I am going to focus on the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. I don't need to recall the numbers. It's a challenge. We need to decarbonize buildings by reducing by 60% their greenhouse gas emission by 2030. And this is why it's so important to grasp this opportunity of the revision to move in the right direction for 2030 and also 2050. 2 points I'd like to highlight today. So on the 4 pillars that were shown in the slides, first, decarbonization. So what is very important is, and that's also on the maps, that the EPPD should be looking at all building segments with a sector-specific and differentiated approach, and including non-residential buildings. So we support the proposal of the Commission on having this differentiated approach when it comes to maps, and especially now to have non-residential buildings included. We're still in the process of assessing the level of ambition so towards 2027 and 2030. But we already having non-residential private buildings in scope is already a very first good step. Second, on digitization. So our assessment is that the potential for digitization is still unexploited in the EU building sector. We see many positive elements in the proposal, such as on the rainforest, smart readiness indicator, digital EPCs, also having a large effective rated output for building automation and control by 2029. But still, we believe that the proposal could go much further, and especially on the digitization of building information and processes, more specifically on the use of digital tools like building information modeling and digital twin that should be more used in new construction and major renovation. So we believe that it should be made mandatory, at least for public buildings and private non-residential buildings over a certain size. So these are the few points I wanted to flag. Of course, it's an ongoing discussion, and as Siemens will be happy to be contributing to it and to continue our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And as a last but not least, we have Sorcha Edwards, Secretary General for Housing Europe. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annika, and thank you very much, Mr. Grassi, for the overview. So a quick reaction. I think I'll focus in on the minimum energy performance standards and the feedback we're getting. So from our members. So keep in mind, of course, we are regulating a train that's already in motion. So at the moment, our sector is renovating over 200,000 units every year, and they've committed to renovate 4 million homes by 2030. So they are constantly, let's say, optimizing the route towards the decarbonisation of the housing sector, but doing that in an affordable way. But with the minimum energy performance standards proposal, they have some concerns. So let's say a lack of a bit more work to do on the contextualization. So having the same deadlines for different for all member states maybe doesn't take into sufficient account the different contexts and the different potential of local resources. So if we look potentially at some districts, they can use residual heat from local industry. Some areas have access to, let's say, more green energy coming in from the grid. So a little bit, it's too much of a blanket approach still. And we see there's some work to be done on that over the next months. So we have to look at the feasibility and the cost effectiveness of the MEPs. We've also have concern about, let's say, the moving of the goalposts, if you like. So the fact that the EPCs will change in 2025. So wondering, will this slow down action before 2025 because we don't have clarity on what the new EPC standards will be. So that's another concern that has been raised by our members throughout Europe. The essential role of district level, I think that we've got further in recognizing that, but we can go even further. So because we find the definition of a zero emission building is still too potentially too tight for some contexts. And then we share in a way some of the concerns of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, in that we have to some extent overlapping of legislation. So they actually raise the point on whether MEPs are necessary in view of the commitments already made to cut CO2 emissions, CO2 emissions from buildings in other legislation. And if we consider also on the cards under the Energy Efficiency Directive a 3% per year obligation to renovate, we see also another potential overlap there. And just to point out that even in the optimal circumstances where we have the right financing and those bottlenecks have been addressed that you mentioned, Stefano, on the ground, so the information, access to finance, we see a maximum of 2% per year in the social housing sector where the situation is optimal. So this obligation, this 3% obligation to be extended to the residential sector, we see potentially fraught with difficulties. Also because it's not financed in the same way as, let's say, hospitals or schools, because very often the finance has to come from often those private, publicly regulated, but private entities. So we see some overlapping of legislation that also has to be dealt with. So that's a very brief reaction, Annika.
Thank you so much. And so we've already heard these comments, some initial reflections. I'll also, before returning back to Stefano, I'll pick up on a question that we have from the audience. And I'll actually turn that's a bit of a bigger question around the prospects for green gases. So we've been talking about the biogas, biomethane, renewable and low carbon hydrogen, as well as synthetic methane. So how will we ensure, first of all, that they themselves will be sustainable? And then we have a question from Jakub Kroskowski, who's asking that will the new rules ensure that renewable and low carbon gases will be cost competitive compared to unabated natural gas by 2030 or 2050? So a question on the prospects for the green alternatives. And I'll be happy to hand over to Stefano. So we'll give you a chance to react to what you've heard so far and provide any additional comments you may wish.
Very, very quickly, because when you say that the presentation is comprehensive, you hint that it's long, so I will be short now. I take the reactions from Olaf, Adele, and Sorcha not just as kind, polite reactions, but the fact that they 60 to 80% they find reasonable what we put on the table. I think to me they highlight very well the need for calibration and the difficulty that is sometimes to balance the different interests at stake. I would certainly agree with Olaf on the centrality for GMP 2.0, for instance, on the monitoring, verification, reporting, and the need to build there. If there is a way to do it stronger, I don't think we will oppose it in any way. But I do think that this reaction is reflective of the fact that the sector is already going there. So I do think that with our legislation, I hope we will open a path that others outside Europe will follow, because I think companies are already going there, and we hope that other big world players will follow us. Indeed, Adele, I think we listened to the issue of non-residential when we were doing outreach and consultation, and I do take the point on digitalization. I think there are maybe other routes we can take to address these issues. I think the part of a construction regulation, etc., is handled by our GROW colleagues, and there are other ways in which we are working on that. We will also have a digitalization of energy package, I think, by the end of this year, where we indicate other ways to bring more the energy sector into the digital era. And I think Sorcha as well has pointed to some real issues. It is very, did we slash a blanket approach on the building sector? I think if we had not, we have done it, I think, in trying to circumscribe it to the maximum to the sector where I think the stakes are the highest, and the reason and the arguments to intervene are also the strongest, the G and the worst performing buildings. If we had not done that, if we had just said any member states can, if they want to introduce maps by the deadline they choose, by the deciding the categories, the class, the energy class they want, and which type of parts of the building stock they want to cover, that we would have been really accused of leaving too many holes and not having any, not giving the signal to the sector that we want to give. I think it's very important also the point she made on the EPC 2025. I think it's indeed a good point. I also know already that the district level part has been discussed internally and will be part of the discussion. What we tried to do was really to build something complementary to the ETS extension to buildings and the ESR, Because in our view, if we do not have some mandatory standards or mandatory requirements under the EPBD, it will be extremely difficult to force renovation action, to incentivize households, companies to react to the carbon price signals. There are some studies that are going around now. They say that the prices should go up to an impossible level of more than 150 or 180 euro to real foster change in behavior. So only by combining regulatory measures and flanked with incentives and then supportive actions and the carbon pricing, we can have a reasonable mix to foster action. Otherwise, too much regulation or too much carbon prices could be possibly just the killer. So again, just to point to the calibration to be done. How the two questions on the how we can ensure that the green gases are actually green. I think, first of all, through a robust certification and a methodology to assess throughout the life cycle the carbon intensity. We have one for renewable gases in the Renewable Energy Directive. And here we set a clear threshold of 70% of greenhouse gas emissions compared to a fossil fuel comparator for low carbon hydrogen. To be verified through voluntary mechanisms approved by the member states and by the Commission. And we indicate that for the low carbon gases, there must be a trend toward lower emissions and higher reductions and technological development after 2030. We were discussing internally other thresholds higher than 70%. The one we have here is aligned also with the taxonomy and to what we have in the Renewable Energy Directive. The best strategy for us to make those gases compatible is to have a very competitive market framework, more players in the market, and to support the adequate development of the grid, again, through our regulatory framework. To all of that combined with support to infrastructure construction, generation of hydrogen through public funding initially. We adopted, I think it was Wednesday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, after 12 hours of a last trilogue, the 10E regulation, 365 days after we presented under Commissioner Simson in December last year. That includes, for the first time under 10E, money for hydrogen infrastructure, cross-border, dedicated, and for repurposed pipelines, and for specific rules for electrolyzers. We have a number of other funds there. So I think these three elements, the first market framework, a clear indication of the means to support the network infrastructure. I think these are the best ways, in our view, to go to this less than €2 per kilogram for green hydrogen by 2030. That for us is the parity point to make it competitive. And possibly what we see on the market, we will arrive there even earlier than 2030.
Great, thank you. And with the very short time that we still have left, I would pose two other questions. One is that reading some of the reactions, one can see that there is critique that the package that has been put forward, it is very much favoring still fossil fuels and protecting gas markets at the expense of renewable heat and energy efficiency. So be happy to hear your thoughts on that. Why, for example, does the proposal suggest ending use of fossil fuels in heating and cooling only by 2040? Why not earlier? It suggests that there are no financial incentives should be given for installation of fossil fuel boilers as of 27. Why not earlier? International Energy Agency suggests that there should be a ban on new fossil fuel boilers by 2025. So why did not Commission take a stronger stance, as was called for by International Energy Agency? So happy to hear your thoughts, and this is really a chance for you also to react to some of these comments that are circulating. And with the proposals now out, we'd be happy to hear what are your thoughts. What do you see? What should happen now? What will happen next?
In 2 words, I think it's an unfair critique that we are providing lifelines to any industry. We have presented the most pro-competitive, stringent framework of rules for the future hydrogen market that one can imagine. Second, we have very clear anti-stranded assets provision, and I had a slide, and I don't want to go back to that. Why we are introducing some deadlines that to some are too early and for others maybe not, because we have a duty as a European Commission to take into account the diversity of the situation in member states. And technically, sometimes it's even not possible for some of our member states to replace a district heating fueled by coal. Warsaw has 6 gigawatts of district heating by coal. How can you replace it through renewables or electricity in the next 2 or 3 years? There does not exist a technological alternative for 6 gigawatts of district heating. So we clearly need to set deadlines in a way that, in our view, can be a pull factor, can incentivize those who are more in difficulty but are not penalizing, and at the same time, who wants to run faster can run faster. The deadline under DPVD I wrote personally at the latest. So if one wants to do maps or anything or boilers earlier, they're free to do it. We are giving a clear indication that within the single market, it is possible at national level to ban certain appliances and certain based on fossil fuels without, of course, risking to the accusation of infringing single market rules. So I think we are very strong there. We always taking into account the diversity of the market and the energy conditions in member states. What's next? What's next? One can be proud about what we have done. As I noted, I think if you look at the number of strategies, documents that we have put on the table, revising the EPBD, the energy efficiency, the renewable energy directive, the gas directive and gas regulation, the security of supply regulation, all of that in the space of 2 years. The 10-year regulation already approved in 10 years is an incredible work during COVID time with people working remote. I think this is just the start, because the problem of Europe is sometimes we say a lot, we have less strategies, we see a lot of movement, but is this adding up to real action? The next years for us are the years of implementation. We have to get this legislation through, but our effort will be to get new markets off the ground, to get new players entering in biogas, biomethane, in the renewables, make it easier to have new installation in renewables. All of that has to happen. A target is a target, doesn't help anyone if there is no new capacity on the ground, no new installation on the ground. So we will see a different type of commission. A commission goes on the ground, solve problems, and try to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefano Grassi. Thank you for our respondents for joining to the discussion today. Thank you for the audience for listening in and also for your questions. It's what we really have in the hands is a very complex package, and obviously combined with also the proposals that we have put forward before summer, we certainly have a lot to look out for, a lot in our hands, also as we move to the new year. So thank you so much for the briefing, for providing us this overview on these next steps for creating a greener, fairer, and more secure energy system. And for everyone, if I don't see you in the next weeks, wishing you a lovely and relaxing Christmas period, and be safe. And we look forward to meeting with all of you again next year to talk more about the climate and energy developments. Thank you so much again for Stefano Grassi for joining us, and thank you everyone, and bye.
Thank you, Annika, and thank you, EPC.